Imagine being charged with a terrible crime. The dread, the suspense, that sickening feeling churning away inside of you as if your stomach were a pot of soup. But here's the thing, you didn't do it. You're innocent. Since the 1960s, there have been 4 wrongful murder convictions overturned in WA alone. That's 4 people who were wrongly accused of murder, who served time or were executed, that have been found innocent. Hi, my name is Elsa, and you're listening to ECU Vanguard. Today, I'll be talking about wrongful convictions in the WA court system. A big reason that wrongful convictions are so often passed through the courts is due to mandatory sentencing on things like manslaughter, meaning a person must be charged if thought to be responsible. Jacob McCauley is a third-year law student at UWA who is currently working with the WA Justice Association.
There's the letter of the law, so reading the statute and what, based on the exact wording, would classify as a crime. And then you can look at the intent behind their actions of the defendant, right? So mandatory sentencing ensures that the person, even if they had no intent to kill someone, still gets charged for the actions that they did. In the sense that it doesn't really matter what your intentions are, but your actions are reflected in the law.
Even after someone is proven innocent, they are still subject to the consequences of the trial. John Button and Darryl Beamish were both wrongfully convicted of murder in the 60s by police and served time in prison despite renowned serial killer Edgar Cook admitting to both murders. Estelle Blackburn is an investigative journalist who helped exonerate both John Button and Darryl Beamish.
I rang this guy, Jim, his name was, to say, look, I can't come dancing tonight. A friend of mine's been framed by the police. He said over the phone, don't talk to me about the police framing people. They framed my brother and he did time in prison for a murder that Cook did. So I said, oh, well, look, let me meet your brother. If he's got anything in writing that I can have a look at to convince me, I will. So he then eventually took me to meet his brother, John Button. He had the High Court appeal papers, and in those papers there was one page, 5 hit and runs, which Cook confessed to, and most important, at the bottom of this page, it said the DPP, the prosecution, the Crown, agrees that these are substantially correct.
The conviction process for John Button lasted over a decade, even over 30 years after his conviction. Darryl Beamish waited even longer, with his exoneration coming up over 40 years after his conviction.
So I started my investigation into Button when I was 42, and it took up pretty well my 40s. And then it was 10 years from the day that I first met John Button that he was exonerated. Then the same legal team I got to work for Button went on and did Beamish after 39 years after his conviction for John Button and 44 years after his conviction for Darryl Beamish.
These convictions had massive effects on the families of John Button and Darryl Beamish, with Beamish's carer, his sister, initially refusing Estelle's help.
They'd lost a combined 7 appeals before, and when I rang her saying, look, I'm looking into the Button case with a view to seeing if I can prove he's innocent, and they said, no, we don't want you to do that for us. Our mother's been through 5 appeals. She's 80 and we couldn't put her through that stress again. We don't want you to even mention his name. But once the book was out and we'd won a new appeal, that same sister rang me. I had no idea your book would be so well researched, so sensitively written and taken so seriously by the government. Will you help us too?
These injustices, most of all, carried the heaviest fallout for Button and Beamish themselves, who carried the weight of murder convictions over their heads for decades.
John Button's mother died in England, and because he was a convicted murderer, he had to go to extra lengths to get a passport, and he couldn't do that before his mother died, so he missed his mother's death in England. The day that the court brought down the yes, we grant this appeal, we exonerate Darryl Beamish. His wife, she'd married and had two daughters. One of those daughters was getting married in New Zealand, and his wife went off to New Zealand for her daughter's wedding, but Darryl Beamish couldn't go because he had a murder conviction. And yet she was in New Zealand the very day that murder conviction was taken away.
You can read more on Estelle's experiences working on these cases in her novel Broken Lives. Once again, I'm Elsa, and you've been listening to ECU Vanguard.